Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 300 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack for Business truly is? Your hosts are Bernie Franz-Grode from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You, Inc.
Today's topic is From Books to Business, how J.D. Barker turned stories into opportunities. So, question of the audience, how can you turn your creative passion into a thriving business while staying true to your vision? Our guest today is J.D. He's going to tell us a bit about his journey. He was born in Lombard, Illinois in 1971. He spent his early years devouring books, crafting stories inspired by ghostly woods near his childhood home. A move to Florida at 14 led him to Lemon Bay High School and later the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale, where he earned a degree in business. While in college, Barker's writing talent caught the eye of Paul Galetto from Circus Magazine, launching him into a world of celebrity interviews for publications like 17 and Teen Beat. In 92, he syndicated Revealed, a column investigating haunted locations before pivoting to ghostwriting and editing, sharpening his craft in fiction. His debut novel, Forsaken, earned critical acclaim, catching the attention of Stephen King and earning a Bram Stoker Award nomination. Barker later co-authored Dracula, a prequel to Dracula, and penned the best-selling The Fourth Monkey, now in development for film and television. A frequent collaborator with James Patterson, Barker continues to create globally acclaimed thrillers, balancing life between Inglewood, Florida, and New Hampshire with his wife, Dana, and his daughter, Amber. JD, welcome. Do you have a favorite quote or saying, sir?
I'm trying to take in the trip down memory lane there. You covered everything. For a favorite saying, that this is a business podcast, right? We're talking about more the business. I do so many podcasts for the writing world, but I guess just in general, I'm selling widgets. That's what it boils down to. I never take no for an answer. I will always ask the question. I am not somebody who shies away from something. If I get some crazy idea to sell a couple of books, I will throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. I don't take no for an answer. I never have, and I never will. The only thing that frightens me in life is to not ask the question and then walk away and wonder what would have happened if I did.
I can understand that. Storytelling and writing. That is a unique skill. It sounds easy on the outset till you actually start doing it and then have success at it. What brought you into that realm?
I run into so many people that tell me, I've got a book I want to write, or I have the story that I want to tell, and I'll try and force them to do it. I'll twist their arm. I'll get them to sit down in front of their computer, and then they try to tap out that first sentence, and they realize it's a little trickier than that they make it seem on TV and in the movies. I've been doing it my entire life. I grew up without a television in the house, and even when we got one, there were only 3 channels back in the 70s. We had CBS, ABC, and NBC. Nothing worth watching anyway, so I spent a lot of times buried in books. I was reading from the time I was 3. I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews by the time I got into kindergarten. Moved on to stuff like Charles Dickens and the classics. Dracula was the first adult book that I had read. I love the fact that you can open up a book and get lost in some world, meet people you've never met before, go to places you've never been before. It fascinated me. I had a sister who was 15 months younger than me, and I used to write up stories, just my first attempts at fiction. I'd staple them together, created a little library in my room. She would check them out. I would charge her late fees. So it started way back in, I was 5, 6, 7 years old or so. As I got older, my parents encouraged the creative aspect of it, but they also kept reminding me, you can't make a living as an author. You have to get a real job. So I went off into college. I got multiple degrees and ended up working in finance. My last real job, I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm. That was 60 to 80 hours a week. That was hardcore. I would come home and I'd write to relax. I would work on tons of different projects. Ultimately, you had mentioned the ghostwriting and book doctor stuff. I stumbled into that. I was doing celebrity interviews back in the 90s. When you work with anybody at a newspaper or magazine, you quickly learn they've got a novel at some stage of development in a desk drawer somewhere. It's 400,000 words long. They've been working on it for 10 years, but it's almost done. They would hand it to me to help them out. I'd fix their grammar and punctuation, give them some ideas on story. And that turned into this little side hustle as a book doctor and a ghostwriter. I would work the corporate gig during the daytime and come home and work on projects like that at night to keep my head on straight.
Book doctor. That's actually a cool moniker to have.
Let's well get right out of the chute. There's an 800-pound gorilla in the room, which has brought tremendous news to publishing, good and bad. Where are you on Amazon?
I like Amazon. I like the fact that they're a disruptor. They came into an industry that has not changed for 300, 400, 500 years. And all of a sudden they decided, okay, we're going to do it this way. They didn't really care what anybody else thought. It obviously pissed off a lot of people, but that's good too, because it's forcing change across the board. I've got friends that are on Amazon imprints and they absolutely love it. I know Dean Koontz really well, and he was with pretty much every publisher over the course of his career. Now he's on Amazon. And he told me when his first book came out through Amazon, they did more to push that first title than his other publishers had for 10 or 15 years. And if you think about it, Amazon has all the perfect tools. Before somebody even buys a book, they know what that person has looked at, what they like, what they bought in the past. They can put that book in their hand. The algorithms, all those types of things, that fascinates me. That's where the business is going. And when I think about that, and I've had books with Random House, with HarperCollins, when I get a marketing plan from them, they send me the same PowerPoint presentation they've sent for every other book dating back from the time I started. It's like somebody just does a quick find replace on the title and they swap out the cover of the book, but their actual activities, how they're going to market that book, never change. Meanwhile, the world around them is changing rapidly. I love the fact that Amazon is not only leading that charge, but in many ways, they're ahead of it. Everybody else is trying to keep up. It keeps everybody innovating.
Yeah, the one thing I realize from talking to other podcast guests, talk about storytelling, not necessarily as with the depth and breadth that you have. It's something that morphs over time. Your early books, how did you find your writing craft evolve from when you started out to where you're at today?
The early stuff that I did when I was working as a ghostwriter, I was essentially writing for other people. I did a lot of memoirs, so I would interview politicians or sports figures, spend days with them, and then I turned it into a book that I'd have to write basically in their voice. It was their story. It wasn't my story, which in some ways is comforting because it's like you're the wizard behind that curtain. Nobody has to see who you are. But I learned a lot from that process. But when I finally decided to write my own book on my own, I got a kick in the pants. I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list as a ghostwriter. So basically books that came out with other people's names on the cover that I had written. And that gets old after a while. Ultimately, I decided to start publishing on my own. And it took me a little while to find my own voice because I had spent so much time writing as other people. To sit down and all of a sudden have to write something totally on my own, in my own voice, that was a little challenging, at the beginning too. But I overcame that and got past it. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. I teach a lot of authors, and I've often told them, like, even if you don't have the kind of history that I do, you still have to write like 200 to 500,000 words before you really figure out what you're doing. Most authors start off trying to imitate the authors that they read. So if you read a lot of Stephen King, you're going to try to write like Stephen King. You're not going to sound anything like Stephen King because he's way better than you are. But eventually, your voice will evolve from sounding like other people. You find your own tone, and your own voice creeps out and takes over. And you have to learn to trust that and go with it. But it's like anything else. You don't do it overnight. You have to practice. You have to work at it. And it's like a muscle at the gym. It gets stronger the more you use it.
Do you find that if you were to write a series, and I'm thinking of some of the more popular ones on HBO or Netflix, but when you're writing a book over many series, is that something that takes a lot of heavy planning ahead of time? Even if you're talking about some kid on a wizardry path, going to a special school, and then later on you hear people taking parts of the story out and going, oh, by the way, did you know? Is that, it's almost like having little Easter eggs built in, right? Is that something that's incorporated? Is that unique? Is that something that's in the tradecraft a lot?
Everybody is different from a writing standpoint. I tend to create my characters first and foremost. I have to develop my characters and turn them into real people. Because without that, I don't know how they're going to react when I drop them into a story. The other half of the story is the plot. So you've got this crazy scenario that just has to take place. So you mix the two up. If you do it right, it's like peanut butter and chocolate. Everything comes together. I know a lot of authors that try to start with that plot. They come up with that and then they just write characters that fit. And to me, that just doesn't work. The characters are very paper. They all sound like each other. But if you have to develop all of it, I think, before you can really write that first sentence, you need to understand not only the people in your scenario, but the world where it takes place. Alluded to Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling's had that world in her head probably for years before she sat down and wrote the first book. You need that type of development for it to work. Otherwise, things just don't come across as authentic. If they don't come across as real to you as the writer, the readers aren't going to buy it.
Here's a tech question for you, JD. On some hand, it's elegant and practical, but on the other hand, the iPod and the Kindle aren't a book. Where are you on that?
It's funny because my wife and I have had this talk, and she refused to use a Kindle for the longest time. She would be in bed reading a book like It, which weighs like 40 pounds, and her hand would be shaking trying to hold up this book. But she would refuse to read it on an electronic device. Last night she was reading on a Kindle. So I guess we all come around. In my world, I think it's like anything else. You choose the right tool for the task. If I'm traveling, I'll read a book on my iPhone, on the Kindle, or on my iPad. If I'm out running, I go for a run every day. I do about 4 or 5 miles. I listen to an audiobook. So I think in my perfect world, sitting down with just the paper copy of the book is the best, and it always will be. It's relaxing. Text messages don't pop up at the middle of your page when you're reading. There's a lot to it. Even the smell of a book. Like, I've been all over the world traveling, walking into a bookstore. That smell to me is comforting. I don't think that's ever going to go away.
We've talked about crafting content, the story, getting used to the publishing world and the marketing, etc. Are there other areas that mere mortals don't know about that authors do? How do you build that up? How do you build up that repertoire and have everything? Do you have a promoter? Do you have a business manager that helps support everything?
I do now. I'm a micromanager. I love to take on everything myself, but at the same time, there's only 27 hours in the day, so I can only do so much. I've broken down and gotten to the point where if a task starts to take up too much of my time, I just bring in somebody to handle it. I've got companies that handle my social media accounts, as an example. I've got 18 different Facebook accounts in different languages. It's not something I could maintain on my own. So I've got people that do that sort of thing. I've got another company that handles all my email and social media marketing. If it takes up an hour of my day, every day, it's just not worthwhile for me to do. Publishing itself has evolved a lot. When I published my first book, it was called Forsaken. I put it out 10 years ago, 2014. I self-published that book. And that was not necessarily the height of self-publishing. It was still like the little stepchild in the corner. A lot of people didn't talk about it. But I put it out in a way, I researched the entire industry, decided if I was going to indie publish that book, it would have to look like something coming out of one of the top 5 publishers. So I used Random House as a model, put the book out as a hardcover, a soft cover, audio book, hired professionals across the board, you have people to handle the cover, formatting, editing. I did everything that those guys do when I put out that particular title. And I think in today's world, you have to, because you need a 5-star read. If you start off with a book that's a 4-star read, you're already in trouble. So you need a book that people are going to talk about, and you need to put it out in a way that's on par with the top producers in the industry. It doesn't matter if you're selling cars, soda, or books. You're competing with the top dog every time. So that's what you have to keep in the back of your head. I indie published that first book. I sold a lot of copies. It was enough to put me on the radar of the traditional guys because they watch that sort of thing very closely. If they see somebody selling books on their own, they want a piece of that. So I had no trouble signing a traditional deal. I ended up getting a 7-figure deal with a movie and a TV show attached to it for Fourth Monkey and the 4MK series. Published it through HMH, which is now part of HarperCollins. So I got a taste for that side of it too. I published a couple of books on the traditional side. I noticed a couple big discrepancies between the two. I didn't like the loss of control that I had. On the traditional side, you turn in a book and they can do anything they want with it. They put whatever cover they want on it. They can change, your author name could be tiny little print and the title is nice and big. They can change the title if they want. They can do whatever they want to it. I didn't like that, but more importantly, I didn't like the economics. When you indie publish a title, you get roughly 70 cents on the dollar because you're acting as the publisher and as the author, so you're taking a bigger piece of the pie. When you go through the traditional model, they hand you a nice big advance check at the beginning, but you've got to pay all that money back, and you've got to pay it back in these small increments. And you're lucky if you're getting 15 to 20 cents on the dollar to pay back that big nut they cut you at the beginning. It weighs on you after a while. The fact that I signed that 7-figure deal, I would encourage everybody to do that. If you're offered life-changing money for a book, by all means, take it. I got a couple books in and I got to the point where I didn't need that money. I was doing pretty good financially. I wrote a book called A Caller's Game a few years back, and I reached out to my agent and I said, okay, we're going to handle this one a little differently. I'm going to retain English rights for myself and I self-publish those, and you can sell all the foreign territories like you usually do. At that point, I was in about 150 different countries, 24, 25 different languages. So it was still a pretty decent sized market. We called it a hybrid approach. Nobody was really doing that back then. But we did that for not only that book, for a couple books that followed. And it worked out really well because I got to retain I had the financial freedom. I had the control that I wanted again. And on the flip side, I didn't have to deal with the foreign markets, which is tricky. You have to translate the books. You have to get them out in these territories that you're not familiar with. So I felt it was better to leave that to the foreign publishers. Unfortunately, as an indie author, there are places you just can't get to. It's difficult to get into grocery stores, bookstores, Costco, airports, things like that. So that was still this one thing, like this brass ring hanging out there that I felt I needed to get. I wrote a book about a year and a half ago called Behind a Closed Door. I sent it off to my agent. We immediately got an option from the film side, which lit a fire underneath the publishers. And the book looked like it was going to go to auction. Pretty much all the big publishers wanted this particular book. I got a call from a friend of mine who worked at Random House, and she said, listen, we're about to offer on your title. When it happens, you need to turn it down. And I said, why? And she said, we're about to lay off a lot of people, and the editor who wants your book is on that list. I got a similar phone call from HarperCollins, and about a week or two later, all these layoffs across the industry happened. And if you've ever had a friend that had a book with a publisher that, where you lose your editor, that book can end up in limbo forever because there's basically nobody to put it out. I had worked in finance for more than 2 decades. I reached out to some friends of mine that knew the private equity firm that bought Simon & Schuster. Ultimately, I struck a back channel deal through them. We started conversations, and I created my own publishing imprint through Simon & Schuster. So that's where I'm at today. I've got my own publishing house. Simon & Schuster handles all of my print sales and distribution, which kind of gives me the best of all these different worlds because now I can put out whatever books I want, whenever I want. I'm acting as publisher, so I get to make all of those decisions. But I have Simon & Schuster as the backbone, so I can get it into all those places I couldn't get to before. So that's what I'm doing today. This industry has completely changed, at least for me, over the last 10 years.
JD, one thing, I am an author, and I've sold 5 of the copies. Woohoo!
Congratulations.
Thank you. Tell me about your co-authoring with James Patterson.
I love to co-author because I had mentioned all the book doctor and ghostwriting stuff I did. Those were collaborations that I did with other people. I liked having 2 cooks in the kitchen. We got to hash it out. You run into a problem, you get to talk it out with somebody. When I started putting books out on my own, there was nobody to talk to anymore. I could talk to myself. That just got me in trouble. My second or third book, I wrote Dracul, a prequel to Dracula. I did that with Bram Stoker's family. It gave me another taste of the co-authoring thing, but this time with my name on the cover. And I really liked it. I enjoyed having somebody else I could work with. James Patterson, that came about in a very weird way. Whenever you write a book, particularly with one of the big publishers, they tend to send out advanced copies to all the big name authors, just kind of hoping one of them is going to give you that one sentence you can put on the back of the book. Greatest book I've ever read, James Patterson, that kind of thing. So he got a copy of Fourth Monkey. I didn't think anything would come of it, but ultimately we got on the phone together. He gave me his review of the book. He really liked it. We decided to have lunch together and started discussing the idea of writing together. At first, it didn't seem like it was going to happen because he outlines everything religiously. He creates 30 to 50 pages of outline before he writes a book. And I've always been known as what's called a pantser. I come up with my plot and my characters, I drop it all together and just run with the story. But I've got no idea where it's going, which he always felt was an efficient way to write a book. So when we had that conversation, we just figured we'd never be able to work together because our styles were too different. A couple months later, we talked again and he said, you know what, let's try it your way. Let's try pantsing a novel. So we did that. I would write a chapter. I would paint Patterson to some kind of crazy corner, this hard situation, thinking he's never going to get out of this. I would send him those pages, and 15 minutes later, he would not only write his way out of it, but he put me into something even crazier. We just went back and forth like that until we had this book done. And it's the twistiest book I think I've ever written. It's called The Coast to Coast Murders. We had a lot of fun with it. But when we finished it up, he called me and he said, we're going to try it my way. I'm going to send you an outline. So he sent me an outline for a book called The Noise. After writing that, he converted me. We wrote that book so quickly. We had the framework in place that in front of us the whole time with that outline. I realized rather than, spending all my brain power trying to figure out what comes next, I was able to take that same brain power and figure out how to make what comes next better and turn it into a tighter story. As much as I wanted to convert Patterson to the idea of pantsing a novel, he twisted me up to the other camp and got me outlining, and I've been doing that ever since.
One of the things I've seen done with some movies, they do alternate endings. Whether it's an online thing or they give you different results, almost alternate universes type thing. When you write a story, do you map out for alternate endings? When you go to film, does your book transition well into a film? You might change how the characters flow for film too.
Yeah, all of the above. So The Noise is a good example because that one got optioned by a company called E1 while we were actually writing the book, which meant when we wrote a chapter, a copy of that chapter went off to the people at E1 and they got to weigh in on it. Not only was Patterson telling me what to do and me telling Patterson what to do, we had producers and directors and writers telling us what to do. We wrote 6 different endings for that book before we landed on something that made everybody happy. But I have no problem doing that. It's art in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's a product. So you've got to tweak that product and you get it right. I'm working on a book right now. I'm rebooting an old franchise from the 90s called Flatliners. We wrote 3 different endings for that book until we landed on one that ticks all the boxes. It works great as a book. It works great as a movie. I've got 8 different projects in various stages of Hollywood hell at this time, and they all move along at different paces. I've had many where I have taken, they've come to me and said, what did you cut out of the book? What is not on the pages of the actual book? Particularly on the streaming side, they're making a series out of something. They want to know what nobody else has seen yet. So all of that material at one point or another gets used.
Something that I think is interesting. I love publishing. I love writing. I love talking about it. I also have listeners that are very pragmatic. They're into a trade. I've heard it said that all sales is storytelling. And I have a feeling you would be able to generate with that and have some fun. And that if you can storytell, you can sell. I wondered what your thoughts were.
Absolutely. I had mentioned that I worked for a brokerage firm. So the firm I was with, this was back in the 90s in Boca Raton. If you've ever seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, that is not far off from the reality that was happening at that time. They would take a lot of young kids straight out of school, get them licensed with their Series 7, put them on the phone and hand them a script. The funny thing is everybody got that same script. Some people could tell it as a story. Some people could get on the phone, make a list of the bullet points for that script, and they would spin it into a tale that they could tell to somebody else that they've never met before. Those were the ones that were really good. Those were the ones that closed every sale, the ones that ended up earning a lot of money. So yeah, sales is storytelling. Almost every industry is. Even the news, in a lot of ways, it's storytelling. If people don't pay attention, if you're not able to captivate that audience, they're gone. They move on to something else.
So when you're having people saying, here's 3 different endings, and the publisher or filmmaker or colleagues kick in and say, is there a perfect formula for one size fits all, or is it market driven? For example, if I'm reaching out into Europe or Asia or North America, do you find that sometimes certain endings or certain storylines are best fits for those spaces, or is it all universal?
Not necessarily universal. If anything drives it, it's probably budget. When you're writing a book, it's a movie with an unlimited budget that plays out on paper. You can do whatever you want. But the second they decide to film that, all of a sudden you've got a location, you've got talent, you've got props. There's a cost involved. A lot of the changes that I've seen made, at least on my side, it's been budget related. That book that I mentioned earlier, A Caller's Game, when I wrote that one, I got a little cocky. Up until that point, everything I had written had been optioned. And I'm like, I'm going to write something that can't be optioned just to see what happens. So I literally blow up like half of New York in this book. I'm thinking there's no way they could possibly film this. As soon as we turned it into publishers, Ridley Scott's company picked it up. It got optioned. They started going down 2 different paths. It's about a radio DJ who works for Sirius XM. She's basically like a female Howard Stern. And about 20 minutes into her show, somebody calls in and confesses to murder live on the air. And not only to the one murder, but tells her that he's going to continue unless she keeps him on the line. This whole thing plays out on the air. When they were working on the screenplay, they basically had two options. One was the full blown, we're blowing up all in New York, and this is very expensive. And I think they got somewhere between $200 or $300 million as a price tag for that. Or we can do the low cost version where the whole story takes place within the recording studio and the radio studio booth. So all these things are still happening. They're still blowing up, but the DJ doesn't actually see them other than on the news, which are limited exposure. And that took that price tag down to about 40 million. So there's a lot of different ways that they can do things. But for the noise, I think that was a big part of it. Like they looked at some of the endings they had and this is just too expensive. The scale is too large. We need to rein this in. So you just tweak it. You make that work. A lot of times when I'm forced to redo an ending over and over again, it gets better. It's really squeeze water from a rock and all of a sudden you land on one and it just feels right to everybody.
If your book is being crafted with the intent of going to a movie, do you ever shape it with a view of who's going to be acting in that role? Like some people have a certain panache, they have a certain style. If you were Sean Connery, I could see him in a spy thriller, right? We can see him playing the Highlander. You can see certain roles, right? Do you ever craft a story or reshape the story to fit for an actor?
Not necessarily because it's going to become a film or a TV show, but on the writing front, I've often used actors and actresses as the basis for characters. Because you can create them quick and dirty. I don't have to create a real person anymore. I can say this person is like Ben Affleck. And all of a sudden I've got somebody's mannerisms, I've got his speaking patterns, I know the way he moves. So I can duplicate that as a character on paper without having to start from scratch and create a person. I would love to be able to write to the particular person that's going to play that individual, but the truth is it doesn't work that way on the Hollywood side. The story gets picked up, it gets optioned. You're lucky if you get a writer, you're lucky if you get a director, if talent signs on, you're lucky. So much comes down to scheduling. You may have 2 or 3 people that you would love to see, but this person's schedule just happens to have availability, so that's the one that you get. You don't necessarily get a choice in any of it. Every time they go out with a project, they go out to the various talent agencies, they give me a list of everybody that they're targeting. It's always the same list. You see The Rock on there. You used to see Bruce Willis all the time. It's Ryan Reynolds. It's the same list of people every single time because they scattershot and just hope somebody's got opening availability on their calendar and they can actually get it done.
You have an interesting perspective working on Wall Street and being a writer and a publisher. There's been a suggestion that the modern movie people can't do anything that isn't a sequel anymore, that no one will write original copy. Now, I assume that's an overstatement, but why do you think there's so many sequels?
I think we all feel that way. Ultimately, I'm a consumer. I love movies. I love TV show. I watch everything I possibly can. The truth of it is they're playing it safe. In a lot of ways, they don't have a choice. We came out of COVID and the film industry was wrecked. I've got 3 movie theaters near my house that have closed down and they probably will never reopen after COVID. And then immediately after that, there was a writer's strike and the talent strike, which made things even worse. So the studios, from their standpoint, have to be very careful where they put those dollars. I think if you talk to anybody that works in the industry, they would love to develop something that nobody's ever heard of, some unique something or other, which they used to do back in the day. But nobody's willing to stand behind that anymore. The studios won't roll the dice on something that isn't guaranteed income. I don't want to point the finger at Marvel, but in a lot of ways, Marvel's responsible for this because they put out a Marvel movie, it's going to generate a gazillion dollars. They know that. So from their standpoint, why not devote all the resources to the next Marvel movie rather than gamble on 15, 20 other ones? It's sad, but that's where we're at. But I do see things changing because of the streaming market. It's getting easier and easier for people to watch whatever they want, whenever they want at home. And because there's so many different channels, so many different streams available at this point, they're looking for content, I think, on that front. I've got plenty of things that were initially optioned for film that are now in the works for a streaming series. And frankly, I like it better because there's nothing worse than a director calling you up and telling you, I love this book, but this is everything we're going to have to take out to get it down below 2 hours. And they got to chop out about 60% of that title. But when you're making a series, if you're doing 6, 8, 10 episodes, they can tell that entire story. The pieces that you took out of the book, they want that extra material, which I feel is better.
Do you find that when a book gets converted into a movie, that the book sales either get not resuscitated, but like putting a new life or breathing fire into the dragon, it just roars back to life again? Do you find that is an uptick on that?
I always tell my film agent, movies and stuff to me, they're advertisements for the book. It's like writing a 2-hour long commercial for my book. A lot of people have tried to get me to write a screenplay. Why don't you just write a screenplay and forget about books? I know how to sell a book. I know a book is going to make me money. Screenplay, that's a gamble. I don't know that I necessarily want to do it. Even if I did, you don't know if it's going to sell. But I know the book will always sell. If a movie comes out, that's going to help sell the book. The book can help sell the movie. They all play off of each other. But those to me they've always been advertisements.
I always rely heavily on Bernie's ability to edit something out if it went very badly. But have you ever seen a movie of a book you loved and God, I wish I hadn't seen that? It was so wrong from your sense of what you had from the author that you were almost embarrassed to see the movie?
I try not to get into it that deep, but yeah, it happens. You watch something and you can't help it. But they're so different. Like when you write a book, I can get into the character's head. I can tell you what they're thinking, every single action that they do. When you translate that into the screen, all of a sudden an actor's got to do that. And you can't get in their head unless they do a voiceover. And to me, that's cheating. So you have to rely on facial expressions, these little tiny things. It's such a different medium. Certain books translate really well to that. I think that's why some authors have had trouble with their stuff on screen. Works great on paper. Readers love it, but it doesn't translate to the screen because the author is just so in the character's head. You just can't bring that to film.
Do you find that, although we've talked about writing the book, getting the book out to the consumer base, and then going to movie, is there any other medium where the book is the wellspring that brings forward? Is there any other facet, like games, online games or something like that? Or even cosplay, certain clothing styles? Have you influenced clothing?
I haven't yet, but a lot of authors don't think about that. And that's an excellent point. I've got a story that I wrote that takes place in New York, and there's a company that's filming an augmented reality game based on it. So it's a murder mystery, and the only way you can actually play it is to walk around New York. And if you hold up your phone, let's say in the alley where the body was found, you can actually see the body in the alley on your phone. So you can live out these crime scenes through virtual reality. That's been in development now for, I think, 6 years. Like they still haven't gotten it right. I do think at some point, though, that kind of thing is going to become popular. It's going to become another avenue, just like audiobooks, just like ebooks. It's going to just become one of those things that we just do, an after effect. And behind a closed door, there's an app the husband and wife download, very similar like Truth or Dare for adults. I've got the actual app in development. We're hoping to get it in the app stores in time with the movie. So there's always little markets like that you can tackle. As an author, I think you should be looking at them. I love the business side as much as I love the actual writing side. Some of the conversations I've had with Patterson, the best ones are on marketing. They've got nothing to do with actually writing books. But I enjoy that part of it. I'm always looking for new venues, new ways to sell titles.
The question you actually as a podcaster have to ask, it's now a law. AI, a useful tool or sacrilege?
Oh man, AI. So I've tried them all. So ChatGPT is okay. I've got one called Claude, which I think is probably the best out of the ones that I've seen so far. But it's good for certain things. If I need to create the back of the cover text, those 200 words describing the book, I can drop the whole book into Claude. I can tell it, give me 200 words describing this for the back of the paperback, and it'll do it, and then I just have to clean it up and get it done. So it can be used to save time. It's great for creating copy for Facebook ads, for things like that. But if I wanted to actually write a story with it, you have to think about what it actually is. It's an encyclopedia. It can only regurgitate what it's been taught, what it's been shown. When I write a thriller, 1 + 1 needs to equal 3. Ask an AI, 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2. It's not capable of a creative thought. It can regurgitate stuff that's been done before, but I need something that's never been done before. It has evolved tremendously over the last couple of years. I'm pretty sure at some point it is going to have a creative thought, and When that happens, I think we're all in a lot of trouble. I'm not necessarily worried about it because people buy my books for my voice, my author voice. Like that's what actually sells them. So yeah, an AI at some point might be able to craft a good fiction book, but it's going to be that AI's voice. So to me, that's no different than I don't see people like Stephen King or James Patterson as my competitors. I see them as fellow authors. So if an AI is actually capable of writing a legit book, it's just going to be another book on the shelf. I don't see it as a problem.
Creative control. We've talked about movies, other venues, gaming applications, etc. How do you negotiate the creative control piece? The filmmaker goes, I got to make 2 hours a movie. I can't use everything. How do you balance out, I can't lose these core pieces of the story? You want to shave it, but no, otherwise it's not the story. How do you set that up?
This all, in my mind, it comes down to IP more than anything. There's never anything that I feel they need to leave in the story or that they should take out of the story. Like, as far as I'm concerned, the story I wanted to tell is the book itself. If an audiobook narrator reads it, it's already somebody else's take on that story. It's already different. When you sign a film contract, you have to give them free rein, let them do what they want with it. But on the IP side, as an author, you have to be very careful because those contracts, like the typical one that I've seen on the film side is like 300 pages long. They can take away a lot of rights with 1 or 2 sentences buried on page 180 or someplace in there. You need the right person going through that document. And I've got some fantastic attorneys working on those kind of things. But to give you an example of 4MK, my thriller series, it's in development with Lionsgate for a series. They own the rights to some of those characters. If I wanted to write a book right now based on the characters in that particular series, they may or may not be involved depending on the level that I write those characters. So you have to be very careful with that sort of thing. David Morrell, who wrote Rambo, he wrote First Blood. He didn't keep any merchandising rights. Back in the 70s, he didn't realize that book was going to go where it went. And he left a lot of money on the table because he didn't retain those rights. If you think about Star Wars, Lucasfilms, it made $1 gazillion because of merchandising rights. The films are great, but a lot of ways I talked about films being advertising. Those films are advertisements for the products. Every time they come up with a new Star Wars movie, there's specific characters that are in there you're going to see at Christmas time popping up on the toy shelves. That's no accident. So IP in general can be a huge money maker that you really need to learn to hold on to as an author. It shouldn't be something you do on your own. You got to bring in the right people, the right attorneys to review those contracts to make sure you're protected.
Speaking of that, how does one get a sense of what you want early in the day before you can hire the attorney? How do you protect yourself most of the time?
I've been lucky. I had attorneys involved pretty much from the get-go. Forsaken, when that came out, there was already film interest, so I started reaching out. I'm on my 3rd film attorney at this point. The players have changed, but the fact that there's a protector in place has always been there. I think always will be. The second you're going to share your book with somebody, I think you need to be conscious of this. If you're an author and your book is out there, let's say you self-publish it, you don't have an agent, you get that email from ABC production company, they're interested in your book. Before you respond, get an attorney, an agent, or somebody to represent you. If you go out to a film agent and you say, hey, listen, ABC Productions wants to do something with my book, would you be interested in representing me? They're going to say yes, or they're going to point you to somebody else because now you're a known commodity. There's possible money on the table. They're not going to turn you down. But you want to have that safeguard in place. Don't reach out to them on your own. Don't sign anything. They send you a 1 or 2 pager. They make it seem like it's, I just signed this. Those are your rights that are vanishing when you send it back to them.
If you had a couple of top tips for people that are writing or want to write, what would you share?
The number one tip that I tell everybody is you have to write every single day. When I was working 60 to 80 hours a week, I still found time to crank out 200 to 300 words. It might be in line at the grocery store, on my lunch break, when I'm sitting at red lights, whatever. I always got it done. Writing to me is very much like going to the gym. It's like exercising a muscle. If you do it every day, it gets easier. You get better at it. And if you do 200 words a day, that's a novel within a year. You can get it done. But if you're only writing like on Saturdays, like every 3rd weekend or whatever, when you feel you have the time, you're never going to get to that finish line. And even if you do, it's going to take you so long from start to finish. Your voice is going to be different from the time you started to when you finish it, which means you've got a ton of editing to do. Your story is going to change completely because so much time has passed in between. It's easier just to hit the ground running, force yourself to get it done, and just go. I love to write. If I go through a day where I don't write, I get twitchy. I feel like there's something I haven't done. I need to get out there and do it. If you're telling yourself that you want to be a writer and you don't actually like the process of putting your butt in a chair and making up those words, you're not going to succeed. You have to really want to do this.
One quick question. Hey, when I craft a message, you've talked about writing in your own voice, and this is where I use ChatGPT, and I say, hi, this is what you are, and this is who the target audience is. Take my content and recraft it. But I add one more thing. I write at a certain grade level. Do you find that you do that also when you're crafting it? But when you write out the raw content, you write it so that it's at a certain level of understandability. It's the difference between holding a science tech manual that explains how the spectron microscope operates and what to look for versus, what's that all about?
Honestly, it's something that came out of the newspaper and magazine days. The editors back then would drill it into my head. Writing is on a 3rd to 5th grade reading level. If you make it more complicated, you lose a percentage of the audience. So 3rd to 5th grade is the sweet spot for most mass market fiction. A good example of that, read Michael Crichton, read Andy Weir. They can take some extremely complicated scientific things and drill them down to the point where it can be understood by a 3rd to 5th grader. That's what you need to do if you want to compete in that world.
If one of our listeners says, man, this man's talking my story, I got to get a hold of him. How do we get a hold of you?
The easiest place to find me is at jdbarker.com. I've got a weekly podcast called Writers Inc. We air every Tuesday. We interview all the big celebrity writers out there whenever they've got a title coming out. So that's a good place to find me. The books are pretty much everywhere, any bookstore.
Perfect. JD Barker, I really want to say thank you. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I've learned many new things. To my co-host, Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. Here's some great information on crafting a story, but it's more than just the story. It's everything else that comes with it.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, KTIVINSIHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.